All right, so in this video, I'm going to be comparing the Mavic 3 versus the Mavic 2 Zoom. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and I know in my last video I mentioned I was going to, because when the Mavic 3 first came out, and they mentioned that it was going to have the zoom capabilities and it was going to have the tele lens feature, I was wondering if I should keep my Mavic 2 Zoom or if I could sell it, because I'd love to just have one drone that can do everything. Previously, I was thinking about whether I should buy a Mavic 2 Pro in addition to my Mavic 2 Zoom so that I could get the bigger sensor and the 20 megapixel stills while still having a drone that has that optical zoom, because I really like to have that depth of field in the shots when I'm doing like a parallax shot or something like that. So when they announced the Mavic 3 was going to have the tele lens and the zoom capabilities, I figured it's probably going to be at least as good as the Mavic 2 Zoom, if not better. And so I did some tests, and I want to try to answer most of the questions you guys have in regards to that, because I was a little bit surprised based on what I found. So I'm going to show you some of the shots I did with the comparisons. So I just laid some of the clips next to each other, the Mavic 3 versus the Zoom, and I rendered everything so it should be full quality. And I started with the most basic, the 1X. So just so you know, the Mavic 3 has the standard camera on the bottom with the 4/3 sensor, and then it has the 1/2-inch sensor above that. And the 1/2-inch sensor is the one that has the 162 millimeter focal length equivalent. And so to enter into any sort of zoom mode, you have to click the Explore mode, and that actually enters it into the 1X mode. And it crops it in just a little bit. So that's what I'm in here. This isn't the full 24 millimeter resolution. It's a little bit cropped in because it's that first step on the Explore mode. So as you can see, you can shoot 4K 30 in both of these, and exact same settings. You can see the white balance is a little bit different, but this is just shot, within 5 minutes of each other, and pretty similar look here. I did zoom in here on the zoom to 48 millimeter, which is as high as you can go on the at 4K. And then this is the 2X. It jumps 1X, 2X. They may have made it so that you can kind of scroll through the zoom now, but when I had shot this video, they hadn't. So right off the bat, the Mavic 3 footage you can see is a little bit less clear. And so something to note, the Mavic 3, when you get into the Explore mode, the 2X zoom, which is essentially the 48 millimeter equivalent, is a digital zoom. And then it also jumps to a 4X zoom, which I'll show you in a second, that is another digital zoom. And after you get past the 2X, it's pretty, in my opinion, it's not really usable if you're going to use it in videos or in a cinematic way. If you're just looking at stuff, sure, it's cool to look at. But, you can see that it's a little bit noisier. These trees comparatively are not as sharp with the Mavic 3 because it is punching in on that, and this is purely optical. One little note, if I were to do this over again, I might not have chosen this bright white building at sunset because the exposure is a little bit high, but this is just auto settings right out of the camera on both of them. So if you were shooting something like this, this is what it would look like. But, I think the optical zoom is definitely better on the Mavic 2 Zoom, despite the smaller sensor. But that's just my opinion. So moving on to the 4X. This is jumping up on the Mavic 3 to the 4X. You can still shoot at the 4K 30 frames. However, on the Mavic 2 Zoom, in order to get past 48 millimeters, you have to jump down to 1080. So this, from what I hear, I believe that this extra 48 millimeters on top of the previous 48 millimeters is a digital zoom. So you go the 48 millimeters optical, and then you can double that again to the 96 millimeters, but that's actually a digital zoom. So you can see a little bit, a little loss in quality compared to the previous shot, which would make sense if you're cropping in or if it's a digital zoom. Just to compare, it's a little bit sharper on some of these buildings as compared to here. But to compare the two, the Mavic 2 Zoom is definitely the better option when it gets past when it gets past that 2x zoom on the 4/3 sensor. So you can compare here, you know, again, look at the trees here compared to this, the sharpness and the noise on this building. Uncomparable, you know, to the Mavic 2 zoom. It's just a lot better quality because it's not cropping in so much. The next step is, and something I want to point out is, once you get past the 4x, you jump up to the 7x on the Mavic 3. You switch it automatically switches the camera to the 1/2-inch sensor, which is above the main camera. And this is, again, just comparison to keep the Mavic 2 zoom at the 96mm, because that's as high as it will go. It won't go past that. The Mavic 3 dramatically increases in quality compared to that 4x, compared to the 7x, because it's no longer cropping. It's at that 162mm equivalent, and it's using the other camera. So now this is the optical zoom with no digital zoom added. Now, it does look pretty good. I mean, again, aside from the fact that it's blown out with this exposure on this white steeple at sunset, it's a much better quality than it was before. However, I've found in the past, you know, shooting for the past couple months with this, the 7x camera, it's not always that consistent. I haven't found it to be like, you know, this sharp all the time. The main things I've found with it is that the focus doesn't always hold. So sometimes, like, I'll click for a manual focus or even on an autofocus, and it'll either kind of shutter in and out of focus, or it will focus on the wrong thing, and it can look a little bit blurry. I understand some of that is just due to like haze, and when you're using a higher focal length, you know, around sunset or something, it can look hazy. But I've looked at it in depth before, and I think there's a bit of a focus problem. But regardless, the footage itself is pretty good. I think you could get away with using this in a video, you know, depending on the quality, in some cases, if you wanted to. And to compare that. So now you jump up to the 14x, which is now a digital zoom on that 7x, 162mm. This is where, you know, again, it's not really that usable. It's pretty, you know, it doesn't look like really anything is in focus. It's a little bit blurry. And again, comparing to the Mavic 2 zoom, you know, I mean, if you had something really far away and you wanted to look at it, sure, but I don't think it's going to be used in any of my stuff. And then we jump up to the 28x, and this is just to give you an example of, like, you know, you can see it's trying to grab focus. That's not a result of the digital zoom of the 28x, but going back to my last point about the camera, it's just not optimized, and it might be something that could get fixed in a firmware update or something like that. But, you know, in terms of using this in like a video or something you're going to give a client, I don't, you know, absolutely would not use this professionally in any way. Now, this is just a quick sample of a little parallax I did, so you can see the two. I was further away in this one, but I wanted to get the same sort of effect. I think, and I was doing this like as if I were actually filming. It's a pretty noticeable difference between the two. This is the 2x, so it's 48mm equivalent. It should be essentially the same. This quality is just quite a bit better, especially in this example as opposed to the other one. These trees are so much sharper, the buildings, everything. It's not really a comparison between the two. This is at the 7x and the 96mm. This is where things get a little bit more, you know, a little bit closer in comparison. I could totally see myself using this shot over the zoom. But again, I've had some weird problems with the tele lens on this camera that doesn't always produce as clear results as this. So I think there is something to be said about, you know, whether the consistency of this is worth it, as opposed to the zoom, where it's always been solid. Let's look through here. This is the 14x again. I don't see myself using anything really above the 7x for anything, you know, professional use. But just to give you an idea, if you were circling a subject, what it would look like. Then we get to the 28x, again, even more blurry. But, you know, if you were, it is fun to just kind of, if you want to pop in and look at something far away that you don't want to get too close to, if you're looking at wildlife or something like that, it can be useful. But when it comes down to it, my initial thoughts were that, you know, once the Mavic 3 came out, I was going to sell my Mavic 2 Zoom. It would be no question, you know, if the Mavic 3 comes out, it's got to have a better camera overall, and therefore the zoom lens must be just as good, if not better. Because the sensor size, I believe on the Mavic 3 for the tele lens is actually slightly larger. I think it's slightly larger than the Mavic 2 Zoom. I have to double check on that. And I'll put that in the videos to confirm or not. So I was thinking there's no question that it's going to be better. I'm not going to sell my Mavic 2 Zoom right away because, quite honestly, I don't feel as confident with the Mavic 3 with the tele lens, just that consistency wise. But I do think after maybe a firmware update or two, when they can get the focus down so that it's not jumping in and out of focus and I'm not having those consistency problems, there would be no reason to keep my Mavic 2 Zoom if I can get that figured out. The quality tends to be comparable in some sense, but for the time being, I'm going to keep my Mavic 2 Zoom because I like being able to get that that depth of field, especially when I'm doing like a parallax effect. It just gives it a really cinematic look. I'll let you guys decide as to what the digital zoom, like what you think the digital zoom is like compared to that optical zoom on the Mavic 2. I quite honestly think it's, I think the Mavic 2 Zoom still beats it in a lot of different ways. And so I'll, like I said, I'm going to keep the Mavic 2 Zoom for a little while. But if you have other questions about my experience with either of the drones, drop them in the comments. Happy to answer them. Overall, I'm very happy with the Mavic 3 as an overall drone. The speed, something I wasn't originally considering would be like the speed and the agility of the drone, because I was thinking, you know, I don't really care if it's 10 miles an hour faster or if it can, you know, go 45, or I don't know the exact specs, but if it can go 40 compared to 30, until I actually flew it. Getting back on like a low battery, the Mavic 3 completely blows the Mavic 2 out of the water. It's a lot faster. It is a lot more agile. I feel a lot more comfortable in any sort of wind with it. So overall, I do really, really like the Mavic 3. The tele lens just isn't up to par quite yet, but I think with a couple firmware updates, it could be. So yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.